So good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the conference, Queer Kinship, Affects, Families, and Bonds. My name is Lynn Mastellato, and I'm an assistant professor here at the Università per Stranieri di Siena, and I welcome you to this panel, panel 13, called Queer Belongings. I'm going to introduce all 3 of our speakers today, and then we will begin in order with Giuseppe Polise, and then Alessio Ponzio, and Hesun Moon. Giuseppe Polisi is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of L'Aquila. He defended his PhD dissertation titled Ecstatic Kinesthetics, African American Women Redefining Pleasure Through Diasporic Spirituality. He has authored several articles on the Black feminine divine, ballroom culture, Black female singers, and intersectional feminism. In 2019, he was the Fulbright Scholar at the College of Charleston as a visiting student researcher. We welcome Giuseppe, and we will hear from him first. I will also mention the title of his presentation, A House is Not a Home, Ballroom House Mothers and the Black Maternal Mystique in Pose.
Thank you for your introduction, and thank you everybody for being here. I'll just get it started. So, is this thing on? Yeah, okay. Because I have to read from my laptop. Whereas part of the show post substantially centers the organization of Black Queer Life in a ballroom, with all its categories and trophies, and the work of gender deconstruction involved in its members' performances of self-fashioning, another core part pivots around the character's personal life, and especially how they build intimate relationships inside the houses, family units that, while being modeled after the nuclear family as far as structure and function go, also deeply undermine its default heteronormativity by queering them in ways that subvert biological determinism and gender ontology. Yes. As a result of the trauma that Black queer youth experiences at the hands of their biological families, these individuals leave their homes and get to huge cities like New York, Chicago, Atlanta, where they find communities of kindred spirits who save them from having to negotiate sexual deals in exchange for food and temporary shelter. At their most vulnerable, joining a house represents for these individuals a source of physical and psychological heaven, a place to feel both welcome and seen, appreciated and valued for who they are in a sea of anti-Black and anti-queer sentiment of the nation. What separates houses from any other home is essentially their genesis. They are formed on the premise of choice and selection rather than biology. At the same time, a strong echo of the nuclear family dynamics still informs its structure, which seems to be defined in hierarchical terms with a reproposition of the parental-filial relationship. It so happens that prominent elder gay men or transgender women within a community are invested with the role of house fathers and mothers in all aspects as their providers and guides. As Jackie Goldsby suggests in her study of Paris is Burning, the houses are sites where, and I quote, women raise and nurture each other, and here the first part of women is in parentheses, we. Women raise and nurture each other not only to provide a measure of protection against the violent danger facing them as sexual outcasts in Manhattan, but also to groom themselves to become a legend at the balls. End of quote. In striking similarity with the heterosexual family model, not only do house mothers appear as much more common than fathers in fulfilling that role, but their evidently more established position of leadership, authority, and respect directly draws from the reverential lore that the maternal has had in the African American community since the emancipation. Unlike the white motherhood preached upon domesticity, the pervasive image of pre-civil rights working class Black woman who mothers is one of great capacity and endurance. In addition to working several jobs as cleaners, cooks, helps, maidens, they took care of their households with tough love and an iron fist, so feared yet so respected by the rest of the family. It follows from here that the mother figure is the most familial trope in a ballroom, and her existence is vital to the correct functioning of the community. The embodiment of notions of care, protection, but also moral strength, righteousness, and rigor, house mother at first questioned the discursive coherence of biological femininity and motherhood, and second, there's such the familiar rupture experienced by black, gay, and trans men and women who have been abandoned by their biological mothers. In the sense, house mothers succeed where biological mothers fail. In a post-World War II crystallization of the mother figure as the backbone of the nuclear family and the natural keeper of its white-derived, middle-class inflected values, cisgender straight women find themselves in a double-bind position. A paradoxical condition that always only contemplates a failure. This is because the rejection of their offspring in the name of homotransphobic religious tenets and moral codes of conduct directly denies the equally sacred fulfillment of the one purpose for which they are socially programmed. That is, a sanctified, God-given and man-perpetuated mission of unconditional care and self-sacrifice. Indeed, because the foundation of Christianity and much of Euro-American culture is the figure of Mary, Mother of Jesus, purity and perfection have become standards to which women are constantly held, and for which they are always expected to strive. In the space of that attempt, that imperative to achieve that level of perfection, the woman's fallibility is always a given. As far as black motherhood is concerned, this pending threat of fallibility adds to cultural anxieties that are both gender and race-based, with the ongoing circulation of derogatory stereotypes, such as that of Mummy and Jezebel, that stretch all the way back to the antebellum South. Through the reiteration of these stereotypes, black women who bear children are made into the fungible signs of excess, violence, trauma, pathology, laziness, against the backdrop of a hegemonic womanhood that instead insists on the concept of respectability, marriage, domesticity, self-reliance, and normative gender roles, all of which are very hard to reconcile with a history of sexual abuse, crooked intimacies, and broken ties that the black female body endured during slavery, migration, and segregation. Yielded by the ungenerous weight of history, black mothers are always already produced as failures that succumb to the white narrative of immaculacy. By giving a portrait of 1980s New York City, Poe seems to intercept and expand a representation of biological maternity for which failure stands as its primary condition, one from which there is no escaping. As has been mentioned before, this is not only due to a bias rooted in the sexual and racial discrimination of the black woman, but also to the interference of Judeo-Christian tenets that have been integrated into the American middle-class etiquette, and whose correct enactment demands of the woman to necessarily deny the offspring the selfless care, attention, and nurture that makes her a mother in the eyes of the law. And here I'm using law both in capital letters and small letters because I'm referring to the divine law and that the law of the patriarchal family, the father. This is made clear very early on in the show when the audience is introduced to a scene of familiar rejection within the first 20 minutes of its pilot. Some moments after Demon, a promising young... I'm here showing you... nothing, because the mouse doesn't seem to work. Okay.
Okay, it's working.
No, it's working. Okay. So this This is made very clear early on in the show when the audience is introduced to a scene of familiar rejection within the first 20 minutes of its pilot. So moments after Damon, a promising young man living in a small Pennsylvania town, comes home from a ballet class he's secretly taking after school, his father storms into his room and yells at him because one of his friends swore he had seen the boy coming out of those classes. Furious at the idea of his son doing an activity typically associated with femininity, and horrified at the thought of his homosexuality, the father demands that he comes clean. Damon is scared at first, but eventually finds the courage to come out, which is followed, however, by heavy beating, further yelling, cursing, and a cliché disowning of the boy, who is now kicked out of the house. In the assertion of heterosexist dominance, the mother's intervention might bring resolution to the physical conflict, but the place in the traditional household ultimately makes her a perhaps broken-hearted accomplice in the execution of the law of the father. And again, I'm writing law and father in both capital letters and small letters. As soon as he hears Damon screaming in pain from all the beating, she drops the groceries she was carrying inside the house and runs all the way to his room to stop the husband. In a typical dysfunctional fashion of patriarchal households, she also becomes the projection of her husband's homophobic slurs, which are rooted in a poorly hidden misogyny. Her womanhood is seen as threatening. He could have been tougher on a child, had it not been for the mother's too mellow touch and her unwavering support of his creativity, all of which leads now to her being blamed for turning Damon into a homosexual. In the father's understanding of familial roles and rules according to traditional views of gender, the mother's too present femininity has allegedly hindered his masculine influence and made a child too weak, which makes her responsible for his emasculation. When he drags him out of the house and says he's dead to him in front of a baffled neighbours, the mother's provision of care is now limited to handing him his backpack and a winter coat, as you can possibly see from the picture, yes. She even hit him before that moment. Disappointment and shame transpire from her last words, all of which come across as seeming to agree with the husband's view of her own defective approach to raising the child. I went against your father's words, supported your creativity, she exclaims, and throwing the X-rated gay magazine found under his bed at him, she continues, and you bring filth into my home. Grieving, the mother now weaponizes religion to reinforce her and her husband's disapproval of the child's sexual orientation with a warning that suggests a momentary return of the God of wrath that fills the pages of the Old Testament. And you know the Bible condemns homosexuality, and God will punish you by giving you that disease, she says, meaning of course the HIV virus that was spreading rampant across the nation and was killing black queer people at disproportionate rates. Here, the loving, merciful creator and savior of Israel, that the black church praises during the Sunday function for their own liberation, conveniently disappears in the interest of an anti-queer agenda that deeply affects the most vulnerable demographic in the country in the greatest time of need. Having now presented the prospect of damnation, the mother proceeds to ask for his repentance, using the love and gratitude that Damon should feel for her as leverage. If you love me, she says, you will go before him and ask for forgiveness and never engage in vile behavior, understood? Here, mind how the woman's words even include a degree of opacity. First, in the equivocal multiplicity in the addressee, him. We don't know which is this him. It could be the Father, it could be God, it could be both potentially. And secondly, in the usage of the sermonical structure to exhort contrition that perfectly collides with the plea of the mother, you will go before him and ask for forgiveness. And coincidentally, God and the husband overlap in her eyes. So what she perceives as the son's disobedient betrayal to both will not be tolerated any further. He is now an orphan. Put in a position to choose between accepting their children and the love of God, these women are pressured into releasing the former to keep their moral integrity intact, which is essential to unarming their relationship with their partners and the rest of the community. At the same time, however, they're acting in accordance with that heteropatriarchal law also inevitably jeopardizes their bond with the children, questioning any possible claim of good motherhood. Coming from black lower middle class establishments, mothers like Damon's and Pretel's and so many other in the show tacitly bend to the will of their partners in observance of a sanctified politics of respectability that reads decency only through the lens of a heterosexual, disembodied Christianity. By rejecting bodies that do not conform to that standards, their own children, these women may try and keep their social capital intact and appear worthy to their men and the community, but the laws they are abiding by also make them automatically flawed, deviant. Rejecting the offspring, they fail to live up to the prescribed standards of femininity and feminine parenting that have been building the myth of a woman's ontology since the 50s. They live trapped in a paradox, one in which succeeding is not an option. In the interstices of this paradox, the house mother's performance of maternal lore and duties appears to mock the supremacy of biology in the provision of filial care and nurture as they become these children's beacon light of hope for their survival in a city. As far as their parenting style is concerned, the house mothers from Poe's come in all forms and colors, and it would be exhilarating, for example, to observe how electroabundance defies the self-sacrificing mother model through a behavior that is partly diva and partly reminiscing of that John Crawford from Mummy Dearest type of crazy. However, focusing on Blanca Evangelista's relationship with Damon at this stage will better illuminate a sort of queering of the black maternal that is strategic to alternative conceptualization of care and intimacy that point in a direction of providing stability to those who have none. While still retaining the external facade of the street black mother held on a high pedestal, Blanca's way to tend to the well-being of her children rely on a level of mutual respect, trust and honesty that originates in a familiarity with both the dangers and the beauty of the world as a young black queer. As someone who can understand them and empathize with them at a very personal level, the hierarchical relationship that the house mother builds with her children simultaneously operates on an assumption of a shared intimacy and knowledge of the black queer experience that dismantles the impenetrable walls of that middle-class Christian-informed feminine mystique, which contributes to the divide between the biological parent and the objectified child. Similarly to the nuclear family, Blanca's house has mandatory rules that are set not just to keep the household in order, but most importantly for the successful socialization and protection of its family members in the outside world. Like in any other nuclear family, failing to abide by these rules will expose the children to the wrath of the mother and potentially to the threat of expulsion from the house. However, white rules such as the prohibition to deal and do drugs and the pursuit of an education speak of a shared common sense in the upbringing of the individual as a good citizen, whatever their gender, sexual orientation and race. Other rules like the instruction to always perform safe sex is evidence of the revolutionary nature and dynamics of this elective kinship. Now I'm going to show you the other picture. Okay, this is Damon in foreground, the same child that was beaten in the before. So one can see this in the episode Access from season 1, when Damon comes home after a date night well past his curfew. In the scene, Blanca perfectly performs the angry, worried mother who stays up all night to wait for her child to come home. She's sitting on a couch, her eyes fixed on the young man as he sits in the opposite armchair armchair upon a not-so-gentle request, ready to start her inquisition until he breaks. "Were you out drinking? Did he," referring to the date, "give you any drugs?" she asks, replicating more well-established codes of tough parenting. However, when the suspicion that he might have had sex crosses her mind, a significant discontinuity in the replication of the heteronormative model seems in order. As Blanca's reaction to that thought instantly conjures in an oppositional specularity the scene when Damon is in fact rejected by his natural mother. The very discussions of the child's sexual life is itself destabilizing when compared to the shame and silence that traditionally surround the topic. Sex is very often a taboo between parents and children, and especially in the 80s, something that they know of and eventually experience of their own with very little to no prior education. Therefore, the fact that Blanca so openly talks about it as an experience that Damon will be naturally drawn to as a young man, and she even details the minutiae of gay sexual intercourse with the ifs, whens and hows of giving, topping, and receiving, bottoming, points to a radical reconfiguration of the black maternal. Such an openness, in fact, responds to a thirst for knowledge that Damon always had but could never quench given the bodyphobic and homophobic environment in which he lived. Not only that, but in giving him the bees and the birds speech, she seems to transcend traditional gender roles and expectation by replacing the father figure in initiation of the male child to his sexuality, the speech. More importantly, however, it is the fact that not dissimilarly from Damon's biological mother, Blanca fears his naivety and unpreparedness for the world might let him catch the HIV virus. However, while the former uses the threat of a horrible death and eternal damnation to repress the child, Blanca's warnings are not to promote abstinence and contrition, but to raise awareness. Only by being knowledgeable about the risks of unprotected sex in the middle of an epidemic crisis and wise enough to act accordingly will Damon feel really free to explore and enjoy sexual identity. Now I'm concluding. To the inevitable failure that black mothers embody in the series, transgender house mothers respond by successfully restoring the children's sense of self and belonging in the world. In their subversive performance of black maternal law, the mystique of a true essential womanhood and motherhood crumbles, and its fictitiousness is exposed. The fact that biology is destiny is only a myth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Polise. Just a reminder, we're going to hold the questions until the very end after all three speakers have spoken. I would invite now Alessio Ponzio to the podium. And Dr. Ponzio is an assistant professor in European history and history of gender and sexuality at the University of Saskatchewan. He's also visiting professor in the history of homosexuality at the University of Torino. He has a PhD in history and politics from the Università Roma Tre, as well as a PhD in women's studies from the University of Michigan. He is currently working on a book project about the history of Italian post-fascist male same-sex sexualities. Welcome, Dr. Ponzio.
Thank you everybody. So I'm trying to open this, so let's see if it works. So before beginning, I actually invite you to follow us on Facebook, because together with Silvia Antosa and Giulia Sbaffi and Michela Baldo, we are the member of the Queer Caucus of the American Association of Italian Studies. So we have a Facebook page that some of you already follow. We really just post a lot of events going on in Italy. And there is also an email that you can use if you want to be part of our mailing list. Again, we post a lot of information about events, call for papers, jobs. So if you want, you can talk to me or Sylvia, if you want to know more about it. Okay, so I'm going with my presentation. Okay, so After the end of World War II, the language of human and civil rights emerged with force in the West. As soon as the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, racial minorities and colonized subjects appealed to the United Nations to protect their human rights and hold governments accountable for their violations. In the 1950s, homosexuals in Europe and North America, comparing themselves to Jews in Nazi Germany and African Americans in the United States, began to coordinate their activities through the organization of transnational networks and the creation of the International Committee for Sexual Equality, which is ICSE, an umbrella organization that coordinated homophile organizations around the world. Homosexuals took a stand against homophobic strategies and myths propagated in the West by using the language of civil rights and comparing themselves to other vulnerable communities. Repressive attitudes toward homosexuals were a consequence of both national and international political dynamics. In the early 1950s, the American battle against queers, the so-called Lavender Scare, which began under Truman and intensified in the years of the Eisenhower administration, was not confined to the United States. Administration officials busy firing suspected homosexuals from the State Department not only urged international organizations to do the same, but also encouraged American allies to remove homosexuals from high-level administrative positions, and allies who did not conform to U.S. security standards risked being ostracized from the U.S. intelligence community. The anti-gay policies and procedures of the U.S. State Department eventually became a model for members of the NATO alliance. Targeted as transnational enemies, homosexuals collaborated across national borders and sought to create a homophile international. In the years following World War II, the Swiss organization, Der Kreis, was one of Europe's most important homophile organizations, publishing the eponymous magazine in German and French since 1932 to promote legal and social rights for homosexuals. In 1946, Der Kreis began publishing articles in English, and this was done to make the magazine more accessible to a wider audience. 1951 saw the first contact with Der Kreis by the Italian diplomat Bernardino del Boca. In his letter, he discussed his plan to create a world homosexual organization. This project, like many others Del Boca had in mind, went nowhere. However, he was particularly successful in establishing solid ties with Der Kreis. Inspired by the Swiss homophiles, he tirelessly tried to found a similar association and create an Italian homophile magazine. But Del Boca was not the only one looking for contacts. The Swiss homophile organization not only shaped Del Boca's project, but also attracted the attention and hopes of many isolated Italians, who in the 1950s published personal announcements in Das Kleine Blatt, the Lonely Heart supplement published by the Swiss organization, in an attempt to escape their isolation. Transnational physical and intellectual exchanges not only facilitated the more or less successful implementation of Del Boca's ambitious projects, but also influenced the lives of many queers in search for some form of kinship. Unlike many other countries, homosexuality has been decriminalized in Italy since 1889. However, the absence of legal repression did not mean that homosexual behavior was accepted. Italian homosexuals continue to face social, cultural, and religious discrimination. For some, the ability to have sex with men in private without being prosecuted was enough. Others, however, felt the need to resist the sexual stigma they experience in everyday life. Building relationships with gay organizations abroad became a way for some Italians to escape to places where they thought it was possible to start a new life away from family, friends, and the stifling power of the Catholic Church. For individuals like Del Boca, participating in the construction of the homophile international was above all a political experience that fostered awareness and resistance. Bernardino del Boca did not speak German. For this reason, he decided to send his first letter to Der Kreis in 1951, addressed to the French language editor of the Swiss magazine, Charles Welty, pseudonym of Eugene Laubbacher. Del Boca asked if it was possible to buy every issue of the Swiss magazine published since 1950. In the same letter, Del Boca also expressed his desire to get in touch with other European homophile organizations and to attend the forthcoming conference of the International Committee for Sexual Equality in May 1951. Finally, he asked Welti if he could put him in touch with other Italian members of Der Kreis. And in his reply of May 1st, 1951, Welti emphasized that Der Kreis had many charming Italian subscribers, but he also stressed that the association could not give Del Boca access to addresses without the consent of these men. These letters were the beginning of a long transnational friendship between these two homophile activists, which continued into the 1990s. Reading the letters exchanged between Welti and Del Boca, the latter's pessimism occasionally came to the fore. He was convinced that homosexuals throughout Italy, from the south to the north, did not want to be political and take action against sexual taboos and ignorance. The absence of laws criminalizing homosexuality discouraged direct action, according to Del Boca. Indeed, he was convinced that Italian homosexuals were much more interested in having fun and fulfilling their own sexual needs than working on the creation of a homophile magazine and the founding of a homophile association similar to Der Kreis or the Dutch COC, the main aims of Del Boca. Despite his skepticism, his moments of demoralization, his recurring feelings of loneliness, and his persistent fear of failing, the Italian homophile activist spent the entire decade trying to realize his two projects. Del Boca's letters to Welti often reveal an ill-concealed envy of what the Swiss homophiles had been able to create, but at the same time, they show how this transnational dialogue inspired emulation. In 1952, after some initial reluctance, Welti gave Del Boca access to the list of Italian subscribers of Der Kreis. In this way, he could try to contact them directly and see if they were interested in participating in organizational initiatives. In the same year, Del Boca also began placing advertisements in Das Kleine Blatt, inviting Italian readers to join together and found local branches of the Swiss Association in their hometowns. In the spring of 1952, thinking that Italian homosexuals might be reluctant to join or found such branches, Del Boca proposed a somewhat daring solution to disguise basically nascent homosexual association as nudist centers. He also proposed using the already existing magazine, Scienza e Sessualità, Science and Sexuality, as the unofficial mouthpiece of the Italian homophile organization. And Welti supported Del Boca's plan, but he also recommended looking for capable collaborators. To this end, in August 1952, the French editor of Der Kreis suggested continuing to place advertisements in this Swiss magazine in order to motivate energetic and enthusiastic Italian subscribers to join Del Boca. In this way, Welti thought the Italian activists would have a chance to select people who were truly committed to the project, a project that, despite Del Boca's efforts, never took off. By 1952, there were small homophile groups in Naples, Turin, Bassano del Grappa, and Milan, founded by subscribers to Der Kreis. In 1957, Del Boca pushed for the establishment of stable chapters in Turin, Milan, Genoa, Bologna, Florence, Rome, and Naples, and for the creation of a Centro Italiano, the Italian equivalent of Der Kreis. By the end of the 1950s, however, this centro proved to be an unattainable goal. As Welti pointed out in a letter to Del Boca in February 1959, his Italian friend had been unable to find, and I quote, decent and well-meaning men who were willing to fight courageously and make sacrifices for the success of such an ambitious project. If the creation of a homophile association did not succeed, neither did the publication of an Italian homophile magazine. In September 1951, in one of his letters to Welti, Del Boca talked about the possibility of publishing a magazine, but in the following months, he stressed that he had not been able again to find other people interested in the project. However, a year later, in October 1952, Del Boca announced that thanks to the support of a few collaborators, the first Italian homophile magazine, entitled Tages, seemed to be a done deal. But this publication, named after an eternally young Etruscan divinity symbolizing the cult of beauty, never came to life. Beginning in December 1952, Del Boca encountered a series of obstacles and wrote to Welty, "Our magazine is up in the air." He complained about his collaborators, who turned out to be irresponsible and untrustworthy, and about the editorial group that was supposed to publish this magazine. The latter did not believe that Del Boca's magazine would sell and asked for 2 million lira to publish it. The publisher wanted someone to cover the cost in advance so that it would not have to worry about the final numbers of subscribers. In January 1953, faced with such obstacles, Del Boca decided to abandon the project. Instead, he decided to dedicate himself to the magazine Sesso e Libertà, publishing in it the articles he had written for Tages. Sesso e Libertà and the aforementioned Scienza e Sessualità, two courageous journals aimed at popularizing sexual knowledge, became the unofficial outlets for Italian homophiles, publishing articles that viewed homosexuals as human beings, deserving support and compassion, and often giving voice to homosexuals themselves. Del Boca was the editor of Sesso e Libertà and a contributor to Scienza e Sessualità. He used them as liaison with Der Kreis and as means to promoting the Swiss organization and other homophile associations active abroad. In April 1952, for example, Del Boca published in the foreign bibliography section of Scienza e Sessualità a list of French and German books on homosexuality, inviting anyone interested in acquiring them to contact Der Kreis, whose address was openly advertised. In February 1953, Del Boca also asked Welty for permission to publish in Sesso e Libertà the Italian translation of an article on American homophiles that had previously appeared in Der Kreis. Del Boca thought that such a publication would allow Italian readers to become more aware of and hopefully inspired by homosexual initiatives abroad. When Italian homosexual readers wrote to Scienza e Sessualità asking for support and suggestions on how to break out of their unbearable isolation, Del Boca always suggested that they contact Der Kreis. At the end of 1952, Scienza e Sessualità not only introduced a section where men and women, heterosexual and homosexual, could look for pen pals. In my opinion, an idea taken directly from Das Kleine Blatt under the auspices of Del Boca, but it also allowed its readers to learn about organization of important homophile initiatives such as the ICSE conferences in Amsterdam and Frankfurt am Main. When Sesso e Libertà and Scienza e Sessualità ceased publication, Del Boca decided to publish an inexpensive version of Tages using a small printer he had personally purchased in London. In his letters to Welty in January 1954, Del Boca sarcastically wrote that there were certainly, and I quote, countless men hanging out at carnival parties and private gatherings, but he bitterly stated that Italian homosexuals were selfish individuals who completely lacked any sense of organization, and therefore it would print only 100 copies of Tages. He didn't want to waste his time and money on an initiative that he knew was bound to prove to be frustrating and disappointing. So during this decade, Del Boca promoted Der Kreis, often complaining to Welty about the high price of the magazine and the lack of articles in Italian, two reasons why many homosexuals were reluctant to subscribe, trying to make connections with other homophile organizations such as the Mattachine Society, RKD, and COC, cultivated personal relations with Webster Corey, with Alfred Kinsey, with André Baudry, attended the congresses organized by the International Committee, and tried to find other men and women willing to sit with him as Italian representatives on these occasions. So he did everything he could to support the homophile movement, and he was frustrated by his fellow Italians who were only looking for flings and did not care much about activism. But Del Boca need not to be seen as an uncompromising moralist. In his letter to Welty, for example, he talked about how much he enjoyed spending time at the Villa Eden on Lake Garda, an elegant hotel where friends could find each other and enjoy themselves in their own world. And we need to say also that Del Boga was married at the time to a woman, while was so active in the homophile international. So Villa Eden was one of many resorts advertised in Das Kleine Blatt. And you can see here, these are all Italian hotels and other hotels that were for homophile men to get together. So this supplement of Der Kreis advertised friendly hotels and resorts and encouraged the exchange of photographic material. But as I already pointed out, Das Kleine Blatt was above all a column for lonely hearts used by many men to escape their isolation. It was a transnational and multilingual instrument that facilitated male-male encounters. So the personal ads in German, French, Italian, and English were written by men living in Europe, Israel, South Africa, Pakistan, Australia, and the Americas. Many advertisers were looking for travel companions, but most were looking for friends. Many Italians who could not count on local homophile organizations relied on the magazine of their Swiss neighbors to find lovers and long-term partners. In December 1955, for example, Ideal, a 30-year-old Italian who described himself as a book lover who spoke German, English, and French, wrote in his ad that he was looking for a man of the same age and cultural level to, quote, build a highly spiritual and comforting friendship based not on physical attractiveness but on spiritual values. In March 1956, Mario, a 24-year-old man, romantic, brown hair, tall, slim, outdoorsy, interested in music and art, who spoke French and German, published his ad looking for a sincere friend, a brother, a father. But there was also other Italians like George, sorry, I made a mistake, July 1955, who were looking not only for a boyfriend, but also for a job abroad, far from home and family. These short advertisements, which do not provide much information about their authors, invite us to reflect on the importance of Der Kreis in creating national and transnational connections between men who were desperate for contacts and channels to escape domestic milieus in which homosexuals could not express their identities and desires. So to sum up, the relations between the Swiss homophile organizations and Del Boga favor the emergence of important, even if unsuccessful, projects. The circulation of Der Kreis, Scienza Sessualità and Senso Libertà boosted the self-awareness of many Italian homosexuals, and the porous transnational network connecting Italians with Swiss, French, American, Dutch, and many other homophiles throughout, for example, the International Committee for Sexual Equality and the pages of Das Kleine Blatt, facilitated the emergence of new forms of queer kinship across national borders. In writing histories of sexuality and gender, it is essential to think transnationally. In order to understand the history of homophile, homosexual, gay, queer, and feminist movements, we need to pay attention to the circulation of discourses, tactics, and activists across national borders. We need to analyze how physical and intellectual encounters produce ideological cross-fertilization and queer kinship, politicizing and radicalizing individuals' ideas and projects. So the friendship between Welti and Del Boga, finally, fostered the emergence of important, if ultimately unsuccessful projects, and exemplifies how the porous network that emerged in Europe and the United States in the late 1940s and early 1950s facilitated the development of new forms of transnational community that produced national and international effects. So this essay, this presentation, serves as an invitation to take a close look at the 1940s, 1950s, and early 1960s through a transnational lens, and to uncover people like Del Boga and the lonely hearts of Das Kleine Blatt, whose stories have been obscured by the shadows cast by the galvanizing glow of gay liberation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Just a reminder for those who came in after, we're going to keep the questions for the very end. So it's my pleasure now to introduce our third speaker, Hee Sun Moon from the University for Foreigners of Siena. Hee-sun works here as a Korean language lecturer, and she also worked previously as an interpreter and editorial translator. She has a master's degree in political communication from the University of Florence, with a thesis on the reception in South Korea of North Korean soft power communication strategies. And she's very interested in media studies, and with current research plans to investigate various aspects related to the social and cultural connections between Korea and Italy. So welcome. And her paper today is entitled LGBTQ plus Representation in Late 2000s Korean Cinema from Romance to Solidarity.
Thank you very much, Lynn, for the kind introduction. Okay. Over the past 20 years, LGBTQ plus themes have been featured in various contexts in mainstream media in South Korea. As queerness has become the central symbol in contemporary cultural worth, internationally queer narratives are being explored in diverse ways in the film and entertainment industry. This shift is evident in mainstream film industry, which has showed changes in the representation of queer narratives. Considering the media's role in forming social perceptions, it is important to observe how it shapes perceptions of the community of LGBTQ+. There have been many queer films released in cinemas and on streaming platforms since 2000. In 2015, the film Carol, based on the best-selling novel and set in 1950s New York. This film deviates from the typical stereotypes of homosexual erotic films, and the most important aspect of this film is a pure romance between two women living in a patriarchal era where homosexuality was treated as a mental illness. Starring one of the most famous female actors, Cate Blanchett, Carol premiered at the Cannes Film Festival in 2015 and received widespread acclaim that year. In 2017, another queer film, Moonlight, won the Academy Awards for Best Pictures. Produced by an American independent movie company, the film based on a coming-of-age narrative portraying 3 stages in the life of the main character and exploring his struggles with sexual identity as he grows up. It differs from traditional queer films, which often focus on gay romance narratives by centering on the portraying of a young African-American man navigating a discriminatory society as a sexual minority. These 2 films highlight a new trend or emphasis in the international film industry and evolving approaches to representing queer narratives. According to the recent trends into LGBTQ plus representation, I'd like to discuss the emergence of a new queer representation in the late 2000s Korean cinema, focusing on 2 films selected for representation in Korean films has evolved leading up to and during the new millennium, coinciding with a renaissance of Korean cinema. Traditionally, Korean society is strongly heteronormative, and in the past, often homosexuals were portrayed as immoral and degenerate. As movies reflect a society, films released before the 1990s in Korea, the character of homosexuals were rarely represented or depicted in a negative light, and their identities often hidden. After the rise of the June democracy movement against the military government in 1987, the LGBTQ+ movement sprang out in South Korea. Despite the growing demand for equal rights and increased tolerance toward homosexuality from heterosexuals, sexual minority issues continue to be portrayed as personal stigmas rather than social concerns. There was a need to challenge the stereotype associating homosexuality with being an HIV carrier. In 2000, South Korean entertainer Hong Seok-cheon came out, marking the first public disclosure of his sexual orientation. A year later, the first Korean transgender singer, Harisu, released her first single album, and she made a significant contribution in Korean TV shows. When those two figures came out as homosexual, they gained a great deal of attention, bringing together social and political issues concerning homosexuality in close connection to the media. Since then, the topic of homosexuality has become a part of public discourse, and LGBTQ+ representation has begun to manifest in various forms in Korean society through both in mainstream and non-mainstream culture industries. According to the published article, three periods of Korean queer cinema can be categorized into three phases in terms of visibility of queerness: invisible, camouflage, and blockbuster. The film Aesthetic, directed by Kim Soo-hyung, who was famous for making erotic movies in the 1970s to 1990s, was released in 1976, and it is introduced and defended as the first Korean queer film by the LGBTQ+ magazine Body. The film portrays the story of the two heroines who bond through a shared struggle against the male dominance, gaining cult status for its controversial portrayal of lesbian romance. Despite addressing taboo themes like homosexuality or lesbian romance, the melodrama remains largely unnoticed by the public and failed to make a significant impact. Another film with queer narratives, Sabangji, took a different approach. However, its portrayal of lesbianism and transsexuality in the era's dominant erotic films did little to bring visibility to the community and provide a positive representation. In the 2000s, the Korean film market has grown continuously, with major distribution companies investing in eminent film directors and the cast, leading to the production of numerous mainstream films. The rise of the Korean cinema renaissance was marked by the success of the first Korean blockbuster film series. During this period, most queer films mainly focused on gay romance narratives, while the mainstream film and entertainment industries have widely embraced the concept of 곤미남 or flower boy as an androgynous figure. No film had a greater impact in this regard than the historical drama film The King and the Clown in 2005, which was introduced new queer content expressing homosexuality metaphorically. This film attracted over 12 million viewers, nearly a quarter of the entire Korean population, to cinemas. This trend can be seen as a reflection of subject deserving recognition and empathy, as they began to romanticize the disruption of gender binaries, portraying them as borderless or fluid. Since the queer film Moonlight won the Academy Awards for the Best Picture in 2017, a new trend of queer representation has also emerged in Korean cinema. The melodrama film Moonlight Winter and the documentary film Queer My Friends will be analyzed through this comparison. In 2021, the Moonlight Winter has selected as a closing film Busan Film Festival in Korea. The narrative of film is set in contemporary society, and the story is led by the perspective of a young daughter. This perspective may imply the viewpoints of the young generation towards queerness. The young female protagonist, a recent high school graduate, plans a trip to Japan with her boyfriend to facilitate a meeting between the mother and her mother's former lover. In this film, the daughter plays a role in revitalizing the life of her mother by reconnecting the mother's unfulfilled love for 20 years ago. Through the eyes of a young daughter, the passage flows naturally without any special emphasis on the gender of her mother's love. As a revelation emerges that her mother's former lover is a woman, this movie falls into the category of queer film genre. Moonlight Winter portrays a queer protagonist as an ordinary Korean mother who struggled with the oppressive patriarchal system. Moonlight Winter differs from the past stereotypical portrayal of women's romance in queer films. This film received critical acclaim and commercial success, with 120,000 Koreans watching in the theaters. Moreover, the director of the film received the Best Korean Director Award at Blue Dragon Film Festival, one of the most prestigious film award in Korea. During his acceptance speech, he expressed his delight in the freedom of create movies with LGBTQ+ content in today's era. In 2022, at the Seoul International Women's Film Festival, the Korean documentary film titled Queer My Friends, directed by Seo Ha-yeon, screened in Seoul, known for its significant social activism and vibrant cultural scene. This documentary focused on a progressive perspective of a non-queer friend who documents the life of her close queer friend, emphasizing the importance of friendship in a society where challenges for sexual minorities persist. Queer My Friend portrays an important chapter in the life of its main character, Kang-won, during his coming out, and navigates the ensuing changes as observed through the eyes of his best female friend, Ah-hyun. This coming of age body film depicts the journey of two friends from different backgrounds as they grow together through questioning, exploration, and inevitable conflicts. As a protagonist grapples with his sexuality, nationality, religion, and identity, in the real-life film scenes portraying his identity challenges, he is not depicted as a typical queer character, but rather as a young Korean wrestling with his future within Korean society. In both films, there is a supporting character who assists the queer protagonist in driving in the central narrative of the film. The film Moonlight Winter focuses on the role of a young daughter who encourages her mother to someone reclaiming her identity in the face of a revealing societal homophobia. Additionally, in the film Queer My Friends, there is a focus on the role of the queer character's close friend who supports him during key moments of his growth and significant decisions. In the film Moonlight Winter, the mother same-sex relationship is subtly hinted through the letters between mother and her lover, inviting audience to speculate on their lived experiences. In contrast to the melodrama films, Queer My Friends present the protagonist like life directly. Through its documentary format and realistic depiction, a clear distinction is evident. The narrative of Queer My Friends explores a meaning of human connection and the queer community in an increasingly individualistic society through the lens of friendship between queer and non-queer individuals. The director's camera traces the protagonist's life, posing the probing question, what does it mean for an individual to find a community to belong to? This question extends to the universe theme of human existence, and the portrayal of queerness is explored through the bonds formed with a friend, emphasizing the essence of solidarity in their relationships. As we observe, the queer documentary films tend to adopt an approach exploring gender performativity, identity stability, and diversity within sexual minority. Conversely, narrative films tend to adopt stable identities of sexual minorities such as lesbian, gay, and transgender individuals. Despite their differences, filmmakers share a common goal, challenging heteronormativity and promoting greater inclusion for sexual minorities. The portrayal of LGBTQ+ individuals in mainstream media has evolved in Korea, showing an evident shift towards more positive representation of queer narratives characters. Despite enduring concepts surrounding queerness, there has been a significant growth in perception towards LGBTQ+ representation. Historically influenced by Confucian culture and the military censorship, Korean cinema contributed to the lack of queer representation, often depicting queer characters negatively or focusing on lesbian eroticism genre films. However, during the Korean cinema renaissance, audiences were exposed to a wider range of themes, leading to increased acceptance and support for queer communities, establishing the LGBTQ+ communities as more common. Since the mid-2000s, Korean queer films have emerged, differing in approach and genre characteristic between queer narrative and documentary films. While earlier representations in media often focused on romantic relationships, the theme of solidarity, including support and activism, has become prominent in queer film narratives. The expansion of queer representation from romance to solidarity can be attributed to a growing recognition of the diverse experiences and challenges faced by the LGBTQ+ community. Additionally, emerging trends suggest that the future queer content will align with the demands of a new media era. Thank you very much.